Hello there, Parth Sharma this side, bringing you chess classics in which I am covering top 15 games played by Vishwanathan Anand. The game that we will be looking at is probably one of the greatest games ever played, and certainly one of the greatest games, or I should say the most beautiful game that Vishy Anand had played. So, I should say that before looking at this game, this is the game between Levon Aronian and Vishwanathan Anand from Wijk 2013, and yeah, it shows one of the most spectacular moves, one after another, and yeah, this game was full of brilliancies. And when I looked at this game, when I heard about this game, I thought that Anand must have fallen victim to Aronian's brilliancy, the other way around, because first of all, Anand doesn't have a good score against Aronian, and secondly, Anand was black in this game and Aronian was white. So I thought that, oh no, it would have been, Anand must have lost this game. But as it turned out to be one of Anand's greatest games, and surely one of the greatest chess games of all time. So without further ado, let's jump onto this game. Aronian is white, Anand is black, and Aronian opens with his customary d4, d5, c4, c6, the Slav defense, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3, e6, e3, knight b to d7, bishop to d3, Miran variation, d takes c, bishop takes c, b5, bishop to d3, bishop to d6. So I'm not going into all that theory, this is all very well known to both of these players. Castle, castle, queen c2, bishop to b7, a3, and here Anand could play pawn to a6, and that would also be a sensible move. But then if b4 comes, then this bishop might be, I would say, might get locked down, and it would be very difficult to get this bishop out of this cage which would be created by the pawns. So Anand plays rook to c8 first, and well, Aronian can play this move pawn to b4. This didn't happen in the game, by the way, and it was pretty clear that Anand must have studied this game, I mean this variation, and his second, one of the seconds, Rustam Kazimzhanov, had this position against Vasilin Topalov, and that game ended in a draw. In that game, Kazimzhanov played pawn to c5, bc5, bishop f3. This is the key move, otherwise black is totally gone. gf3, knight takes c5, d takes c5. Looks like black is down a piece for the moment. Rook takes c5, but indeed white, I would say, black has time. And if you, let's say, play pawn to e4, then, or yeah, if you play pawn to e4, then queen c7, and if you play bishop to b2 and rook c8, piling up on this knight which is already pinned against the queen, that can be painful. So understandably, in that position, Topalov played pawn to f4 to close this diagonal first, knight to d5 piling on the pin, and after bishop b2, knight c3, bishop c3, queen c7, rook f to c1, rook to c8. Well, in that game Topalov played bishop to b4, and that game ended in a draw after rook takes and rook takes. And alternatively, another variation that runs into this line, pawn to b4, is to play a5, and after ba5, c5, just opening this bishop's line, knight takes b5, looks like, I would say, a dangerous move. But then after cd4, knight doesn't have time to take because the queen is en prise, queen to e2, knight to c5, ed4, knight takes d3, queen d3, and now bishop tucking to b8. Although white has two passed pawns at the flank side of the board, at the a, I would say on the a file, but still the pawns aren't running anywhere basically, because this a6 square is undefended, and to defend this knight has to move, and once this knight moves, then it would be black's turn to pile up a lot of pressure on white, and the position would still end in a draw. So Anand's team studied this move, pawn to b4, extensively. But Aronian comes up with this plan, knight to g5, just attacking directly towards this pawn on this fragile pawn on h7. And Anand, realizing that if he tries to act on like playing pawn to h6, then this bishop might, the chances that this bishop might get permanently locked into this cage of pawns, because then black won't have any chance to react by playing pawn to c5. For instance, playing, let's say, h6, then this knight might jump to e4, and that can be very nasty, already piling up the pressure here. So Anand, realizing the fact, plays pawn to c5. And if we jump back one move back on knight to g5, experts are calling out that bishop takes h2 might have been a nice try, like getting a pawn, but then again the same situation rises, that two bishops and a better pawn structure in this position, with this bishop already locked down with the pressure of c6, and there is already this bishop lining down at the pawn on h7. Chances might be that white would still be better in that case. For instance, if we play pawn to f3, kicking that knight away, and knight g2 f6, and this position is almost holdable, white would simply play pawn to b4, and this bishop will forever be trapped. Realizing that fact, Anand plays pawn to c5, and he said that he wasn't able to recollect everything that he prepared in this line, because he prepared this against I would say this for Boris Gelfand in his 2012 Virtus Championship match, where you will see all his black games were normally Slav, and he realized that he must have done some research on Slav. But if he's, I would say, if he's going one d4 every game, he must have researched in all of its, in great depth, all of its variations. And normally the best move in this position should have been to take on h7 with the bishop. Aronian took it with the knight, and obviously knight cannot take, because then queen takes h7 will be mate. And the first move is to play king to h8, and after f4, cd4, ed4, I would say white would still be better in that case, because I would say this diagonal is locked with this f4 pawn, and position would still be fine, because there is no time to bring this queen out. For instance, queen b6 then would be met by queen to d3. Not only coming out of this rook spin, the knight will also have an ease of movement. But Aronian took on h7 otherwise, taking with the knight, and Anand goes for an attack straight away. Knight to g4, and obviously the rook is off freeze, as you can see, but it cannot be taken, because then comes this devastating check on h2, king to h1, and now queen h4 is deadly. The threat is to play bishop g3 and queen to h2, the standard stuff. If we play rook to d1, then bishop g3 is coming anyway, and yeah, it would be devastating. Alternatively, the best move here could be to play pawn to h3, but then bishop h2 check, king h1, queen to h4, and things again look, I would say, skeptical for white. Obviously there is no time to take here, because queen takes h3. Look at this bishop raking down to this white king. The pawn would be pinned, it won't be able to take the queen, and this would be, I would say, devastating. Realizing the fact that these bishops are looking absolutely dangerous this side, Aronian decides to close this by playing pawn to f4. And in our previous variation, we saw how pawn to f4 was able to, I would say, lock this bishop here. But in this case, since this bishop is here rather than here, and this knight is somewhat, I would say, useless piece on h7, it's just looking at the rook, where in fact taking the rook won't do any good. So he plays pawn to f4, cd4 obviously, and knight takes f8 must have been a better choice. Aronian took back the pawn. But let's see what happens if knight takes f8. In this case, king takes f8, black still has time to take that, and after ed4, queen b6, I would say black still has the upper hand. I mean, I would say little bit, but not completely. And after, let's say, queen to e2, queen takes d4 check, king h1, knight d2 f6, protecting the knight. And let's say if white plays pawn to h3, then knight h5, and I would say your position would still be equal. I won't say how black would be able to build his chances. Maybe with the accurate play, this should be a draw. Instead, Aronian takes the pawn on d4, and I would give you some time. Take a pause and think what spectacular move Anand played in this position. Well, if you found it out, that's brilliant. And if you just want to enjoy the show, bishop to c5. And he took half an hour to find bishop to c5 because his preparation, obviously his preparation against Gelfand for their match in World Chess Championship was, I would say, 2 to 3 months back. And since Gelfand didn't play moves like that, it was quite evident that Anand must have, I would say, must have forgotten some lines in this variation. So it took half an hour thought to find bishop c5. I mean, to play cd5 and bishop c5. Together he took half an hour, and it was very difficult for Anand to play that move. Maybe the best move in this position was to play dc5. And after knight c5, black is a piece down, as you can see. But still, after the, let's say, knight takes f8, knight takes d3, black would still have the upper hand because there is always a chance to play queen to d4. But what happens if he plays bishop takes b5? Then queen d4 is devastating, and after rook f2, knight e4, everything is barraging down. No time to play bishop e3, the queen will simply take it, and this rook is still under pin. So the best try would be after knight takes e5 is to play h3, an intermediate move, and after knight takes d3, knight takes rook, queen d4 check is a beautiful intermediate move, I would say. Before taking the knight or before doing anything, king h1 and knight d2 f2 check, rook takes f2, knight takes f2 check, the only move king h2, and after knight d3, I would say black would still be better because this knight isn't going anywhere, and look at this queen side of white, it's totally underdeveloped. This knight is still under pin. The queen has to be absolutely careful. Already a pressure of playing knight takes pawn, and maybe if black gets time to play rook to d8 and just down the board. Very tricky. In this position, Aronian commits a fatal error. He plays bishop to e2, and I will give you some time. Take a pause and think what Anand played in this position. Well, if you found it out, That's brilliant. And before I would show that what did he play, Anand first thought that bishop takes d4 must be a better option, a very strong option. But after king h1, knight d2 f6 is forced, and white would have nothing better than to just take the knight, and knight takes, and black would still be better. And Anand said after the game that he was playing on these moves like bishop c5, and after the move that I will be showing you, on this confidence that not even though the position might not be winning, but still the position would be better for black. And after bishop to e2, the moment you were waiting for, Anand plays this superb double exclaim knight d to e5, and a variation that Aronian said after the game, that if he had seen knight d to e5, then after bishop c5 he would have played dc5, knight c5 and queen to e2, and this looks draw. He obviously must have calculated the pawn takes c5, pawn takes c5 or pawn takes bishop, and after knight takes d3, queen takes g4, queen d4 check, king h1, black would have nothing better than to just take the knight on h7. And Aronian said that if he had seen this move, knight d to e5, then he would have definitely taken it on c5 instead of playing bishop to e2. Now knight d e5 has come. Pawn is attacking both of these pieces. Knight is also attacking, but none of them can be taken. If pawn takes knight, this is a very cheeky mate. I absolutely love it. The smothered mate, everyone's dream. And if you take the bishop, the similar story. After queen d4, king h1, knight f2 check, king g1, knight h3 check, king h1, queen g1 check, rook takes g1 and knight f2 mate. And after knight f2 check, if you take the knight with the rook, then queen takes f2 and there is no defense to either queen here, mate. Look at this bishop. I would say the killer bishop, or even queen e1. One of them is coming and that would be game over. And another thing is that white can try to play pawn to h3. Looks again a defensive option. But then after bishop takes d4, check, king h1, queen h4 is totally end of the world. Again this bishop, the pawn is threatened and mate in one is threatened, and that would be curtains for white. So after knight d e5, Aronian takes the knight. Bishop takes d4 check, king to h1, knight takes g4, and now Aronian has probably already realized that he's lost, and he tries this last trick. Very tricky move indeed. Knight takes f8, and again I would be giving you some time. Take a pause and think. The most, I would say, the move of the game after knight d e5, definitely. If you found it out, that's brilliant. And if you just want to enjoy this spectacular move, pawn to f5, brilliant stuff. What is going on? Why did I say knight takes f8 is a tricky move? Queen h4, no defense to queen h2 mate. There's absolutely no defense. Pawn to h3, then queen h3, and this bishop, as I say, is a deadly monster on b7. No hopes. But there is one hope for white. If he goes like this, queen h7 check, exchanges queens, and white survives. Very tricky move indeed. So after knight takes f8, f5 closes this route to h7 for the queen to give a safe square. I would say a safety towards black's relentless attack. Knight to g6, stopping queen to h4, or a simple move queen to f6. And the best move here should have been to play queen to d3. But then black would still gobble up that knight. And if you try to take the bishop, I'm afraid bad news is awaiting you. Knight to e3. There is no time to take this knight with either the bishop or the queen, because once again this bishop. And if you play, let's say, rook to f2, then this is actually mate in 3. After bishop g2, king g1, bishop f3, you block with rook and queen takes rook will be mate. So after knight to e3, the only move that would keep the game going would be queen to d2. But this is also lost after bishop takes g2, king g1, bishop takes f1 check, and these spectators aren't contributing anything. They are just like hopeless pieces. And there is already no time to take because of queen g2 mate. White is totally gone. But after queen takes g6, white can play queen to g3. Black has this knight to f2 check, and you can take it in two ways. The best would be to take it with the queen, but why would you like to give a queen? Let's take with the rook. But then after queen takes g3, h g3, bishop f2, threat is to play king f7 and rook h8 mate. So knight d1 creating a tempo, but then bishop g3, this king is somewhat locked. Threat is to play rook d8. This bishop won't be able to develop this side, and if bishop e3, then rook here. And let me show you. If you play knight to c3, then rook to d8. And if bishop e3, then rook d3. Bishop cannot go here because rook will simply take it. And if we play rook here, then the bishop will take the rook. So the position after queen d3, queen takes g6 already gone. Aronian plays pawn to h3. And by the way, the last variation that I forgot to show you is that if he plays knight to e5, and again it looks like white might survive this game, but again there is this tactical shot, and if you try to play queen to h4, then knight f3 actually wins for white because he would be a rook up. But after knight to e5, knight takes h2 is a killer blow. The king cannot take because then queen h4 will be mate, and the game would end very shortly. So after queen f6, he plays h3, but it doesn't make a difference. Queen takes g6. Pawn cannot take the knight because queen h6 will be mate. So after queen g6, Aronian plays queen to e2. Anand plays queen to h5. His threat is to play queen here, exploiting the pin. And yeah, the best move here looks like to play rook to f3. Anand saw this move and expected this variation. Knight f2 check, king h2, bishop f3, queen f3, queen f3, gf3, knight d3. Again, these pieces haven't developed yet. Already there is a pressure on this knight. Black is in the hot seat. Still a winning endgame. This is totally lost for white. And after rook f3, Anand can also do it in this way, changing move out a little bit, and it still doesn't make a difference. Knight e4, discover check, and he can go into this completely winning endgame like this, where he is actually a pawn up as well. So rook f3 must have been a better answer to this attack. Still would have been lost, but at least would have, I would say, continued the game. Aronian plays queen to d3, and I will give you the opportunity to guess the final move, take a pause and think. So the final move in this game was bishop to e3, an interference move, stopping queen's access to h3. Threat is to play queen takes h3, exploiting the pin, and queen h2 or queen takes g2 mate. No wonder this game is considered to be one of the greatest chess games ever, and a spectacular game, really. And the final thing that I would like to tell, that rook f3 isn't possible, because then bishop takes, pawn takes, and queen h3 is coming. And many people, I would say, consider this as to be the greatest chess game ever. I mean, there are some disputes between Kasparov-Topalov game, or maybe this game, or maybe some other game, but still this is in my mind probably one of the great games ever. So that's it for top 15 games by Anand this series. Brilliant games, spectacular games, learned each and everything out of it. It just inspires me a lot. The first ever grandmaster from India has brought so many laurels to the nation. It feels heartening, it feels I would say privileged to have seen Anand play this beautiful chess. So that's it from today. I hope you liked the video. I hope you liked my analysis. Thanks for watching. Till the next time, stay safe. Cheers. Bye.